Good evening and welcome. This is the October 16th, 2024 public hearing of the Land Use Commission for the City of Evanston. The City Code directs this body to hear applications for map and text amendments, special uses including planned developments, zoning relief, and appeals from decisions of the zoning administrator, as well as to make recommendations regarding the city's long-term planning goals and objectives. Depending on the type of matter, this commission will either make a final determination or send its recommendation on to City Council. Ms. Jones, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Aravallo. Commissioner Halleck.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Linwall. Commissioner Rabati.
Here.
Commissioner Mangum. Here. Commissioner Murinchev.
Here.
Commissioner Fectel.
Here.
Chair Rogers.
Here. With 6 members present, we do have a quorum. Also present tonight from city staff are Neighborhood and Land Use Planner Megan Jones, Zoning Administrator Melissa Klotz, Planning Manager Liz Williams, as well as, Senior Planner Sam Hubbard. This is a formal hearing. There are rules that govern our proceedings. Most importantly, only one person speaks at a time so that all testimony may be accurately recorded. Anyone who wishes to address the commission on any matter on tonight's agenda will be given the opportunity to do so at the appropriate time. Our procedure is to hear from the staff on the documents on file and then receive testimony and other evidence from the applicant or appellant. After that, persons wishing to make a statement regarding the matter will have a chance to do so. Any person with a legal interest in property located within the defined notification requirements of the subject property may present evidence, reasonably question witnesses, or seek a continuance of the hearing. When all supporting and opposing testimony and statements have been heard, the applicant or appellant will be given the opportunity for rebuttal or a closing statement. Then the commission will close the record and begin deliberation to consider the standards. The commission will make formal findings of fact based on the testimony and evidence presented, guided by the standards, the commissioner's knowledge of the community, and the recommendations of staff. All testimony is taken under oath. Although we do not apply the strict rules of evidence, please limit your testimony to the proposal as it relates to the standards contained within the zoning ordinance and the corresponding staff memorandum. When testifying, please state your name and address for the record and sign in on the provided public comment sheet. Our meetings are audio and video recorded. Please make sure that you are at a microphone when asking questions or making statements so that you can be properly recorded. All proceedings are subject to broadcast at a later date. Any matter not concluded at tonight's hearing will be continued to our next regularly scheduled meeting. We do have one item of business in our regular items of business, which is a planned development for 162131 Chicago Avenue. Is the applicant present? They are. The other item will be a discussion item, which we'll be having after that. We do not have any minutes to approve this evening. And so we'll get right to the business at hand. At this point, I'm going to ask anyone who may be speaking to us on 162131 Chicago Avenue to be sworn by raising their right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth throughout the course of these proceedings? Thank you. At this point, Mr. Hubbard, are you reading into the record for me, if you would, please?
Yes. The applicant and property owner, Jeffrey Michael of Horizon Group XXIII LLC, has applied for a special use for a planned development at 1621 to 1631 Chicago Avenue to construct a 12-story mixed-use residential building with 10,832 square feet of ground floor and basement commercial space, 110 dwelling units, including 32 bonus dwelling units per the inclusionary housing ordinance, and 48 parking spaces within a 2-level parking garage in the D4 Downtown Transition District. As part of this application, the following site development allowances have been requested. 1, 78 dwelling units, including 8 on-site inclusionary units plus 32 market rate bonus units for 110 total dwelling units, or a maximum of 54 dwelling units plus IHO bonus units is allowed. 2, 114.7 foot building height, where a height of 105 feet is allowed in the D4 district. The overall building height is 135 feet. Number 3, 48 parking spaces, including 2 compact spaces where 91 parking spaces are required. And number 4, to allow 2 parking stalls at 15 feet in length where 18 feet in length is required. The applicant may seek and the Land Use Commission may consider additional site development allowances as may be necessary or desirable for the proposed development.
Thank you. At this point, I will ask the applicant to please come up to the lectern and tell us about the proposed project.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Land Use Commission. My name is Michael Esger from the law firm of Acosta Esger, and we are located at 1030 West Chicago Avenue in Chicago, and I represent Horizon Group 23 LLC, the applicant in this matter. And here with me this evening is my partner, Rolando Acosta, my associate, Dan Egan, and members of the development team, including Jeff Michael, who's the applicant and owner of the subject property at 1621 to 31 Chicago Avenue. Tim Kent, the project architect from Papa George Hames Partners. Michael Worthman from KLOA, our traffic engineer. And Jonathan Perman, who's the managing director of the Perman Group. He's our fiscal and economic impact advisor and project consultant. So as you may know, some of you that have been around, this project has also been around, and we call this project the Legacy, and it's evolved over the years quite a bit. It's gone from a taller, more dense building to the current, more modest proposal consisting of 110 dwelling units. That includes 32 bonus inclusionary housing units. It's got approximately 7,300 square feet of ground floor commercial space, 110 bicycle parking spaces, which is interesting and I'll get to, and then 48 automobile parking spaces. The building is a 12-story, partial setback 12-story building. Its maximum height is 135 feet, and the zoning height is 114 feet, 7 inches. I'm going to briefly present some slides, and then we'll open it up for comment or question. With that, we're looking here at the project site. The first slide shows this, and it's the east side of Chicago Avenue, with Davis Street to the south and Church Street to the north. The block contains a variety of residential, commercial, and mixed-use buildings with widely varying heights. As pointed out in the staff report, the subject property's location within downtown Evanston makes it ideal for a multi-story development, including a dense mixed-use development. Next slide is our context. This is the context showing downtown Evanston looking southeast. And then here's how we fit into that context. We can see our building, the Legacy here, and we can see that by showing this, we're tapering from the west with some taller buildings with bigger masses down to the east, which is appropriate for our transitional district. Interestingly, right across the street on the same street of us on Chicago Avenue is the Park Evanston at 236 feet, over 100 feet taller than we are on the east side of the street. There's also some buildings to our east that are of the same height that we are. Next slide shows a view looking west, and we can get a good feel for where we fit into that context with some heights added in. Interestingly, the Mather to our east is, their tippy top is 143, our tippy top is 135. The predominant roof heights for both buildings are 124 feet, now that with our significant height reduction, and this really puts it into context in terms of the much taller Park Evanston across the street and shows our transition into the neighborhood. This slide shows it's a view looking southeast. It puts things into context with more of a rendered view of the building. We can see a few things from here. One, certainly how we fit in as we look to the east. We can also see the relationship to the Park Evanston to our west and to the neighboring buildings that we have. This slide also shows that partial setback 12-story, and then also the setbacks from our north and south property line, which really add a lot of light and air and just a feeling of reducing the mass of the building. This side looking north on Chicago Avenue from just south of Davis shows our impact on the street. You can see it back here ghosted in just north of the Marion. the Legacy is a really great example of transit-oriented development. I know that the city is embracing transit-oriented development more and more. And we can see that the project is approximately 1,230 feet away from the Davis Street CTA station and a quarter mile away from the Davis Street Metro. We're in close proximity to three major bus lines, the CTA 201, the PACE, and the two PACE lines. Also, immediately on our side of the street and adjacent to our property is the protected bike lanes on Chicago Avenue. And this project is certainly informed by and influenced by those protected bike lanes. And we've really embraced that bicycle feature with our building, with 110 bicycle parking spaces. So one-to-one bicycle parking for the residents. We feel like that's going to be something that is a terrific alternative mode of transportation. There's also alternative, external parking racks for visitors of the property, including the retail. The ground floor plan has a number of key points and program features that we wanted to point out. First of all, there's a proposed 60-foot temporary loading standing zone on the property, in the parking lanes that we would take. We've been working closely with the city on this, and this would be a place where temporary loading, so Amazon packages, Ubers, Lyfts, drop-offs, pickups could occur. Then you've got the protected bike lanes. Then you've got the sidewalk features. We have the main entrance of the lobby for the residential, and then the retail ground floor commercial space. And then just rotating around the ground floor plan, we can see this is our bike room with the exit out onto the alley for safety purposes. We then have the parking garage entrance, again, off of the alley, the way the city would like to see that happen. The alley is a two-way 20-foot alley that allows for cars to ingress and egress both going to the north or the south. If they want to come from Church Street headed east, they can make a right turn into the alley, turn in, and similarly, if you're going west on Davis, you can turn into the alley and access that. We have all the functions of the building internal. So there's the trash that's internal, the freight elevator that's internal, recycling, and importantly, the loading. So right now, the conditions of the property are 7 different commercial storefronts with 7 different sets of dumpsters and a lot of activity for commercial properties. This will all be consolidated with this proposal into our one building with internal loading, internal trash. And this is really sort of a key feature of the project, and it's been a lot of conversation. So I just want to take a moment to explain one of the key public benefits and just key features that we've been working on. We've heard a lot of comment about the alley, the functioning of the alley. It's in disrepair. So after one of our community meetings, I worked closely with Councilman Kelly and Narissima, and we set up a meeting with our principals, our traffic consultants, and the city staff in the alley. And we looked at the conditions, and we can see that it's not in great shape. But we also looked at some of the ways the dumpsters and are organized. And the applicant also owns the Marion, so has some control over the management of the Marion and including that addition. So what we said is, let's come up with a plan that will work for the church, which is an important neighbor of ours, and they have a parking lot back there. We also have other neighbors on the alley. And we came up with a way to say, hey, if we could consolidate some of these dumpsters, right now each tenant in the Marion has their own, and there's like oil canisters, that the containers, from the restaurants. So if we can consolidate some of those, maybe we can reduce the amount of containers, but also reduce and coordinate the scheduling of the pickup. So the Horizon Group got in touch with LRS, the city's disposal agency, and that's who they use as well. And we got a letter and we worked with them to let them review the project. And they confirmed a few things. One is that this internal loading works for them. This is wide enough inside the way that Tim and Papa George designed this. The trucks can come down the alley and back in, and there's enough room for those, for even the trash pickup, so that doesn't have to occur in the alley anymore. Also, we have move in and move outs, and that was a big contention for some in the community. how can we manage that so that we don't have move in and move outs just occurring all the time? And Horizon manages a bunch of these properties and has committed to making sure that these events are scheduled. And they're not going to be scheduled in rush hour traffic. They are going to be scheduled at off-peak times. And given that there's only one loading elevator, it's very simple for them to coordinate with the move in and move outs of the residents in the building. So there are other features like that. It's in our alley management plan. It's been reviewed extensively by the city, and they've now endorsed it and said that, yes, this makes sense to us. This works. That's the management part of the plan. But we also have an alley that's in bad shape. And from the get-go, in previous iterations of this, the applicant and Horizon and Jeff had committed to doing some paving behind their building, patchwork after normal construction, but also to contribute $200,000 towards the repair of the alley. We wanted to put a little more meat on the bones because it was confusing. There was different sections broken down by different ownership. And so working closely with staff, we have agreed to increase and simplify the benefit to a $400,000 commitment to repair of the alley. And the city obviously owns and controls the alley. And the city has estimated that it's approximately a $500,000 item. So our $400,000 contribution is approximately 80% of the cost. And this will help to not only improve the alley with resurfacing, but also it upgrades to stormwater elements in the alley. It's resurfacing from Church to Davis, and the city would be able to do this work. We've been talking about timing and budgeting for the 2027 is what we're hoping, but after construction of the building. And the remaining, and they'll be able to pick up the remaining costs for that and do that work. And the adjacent property owners, including the church and our condo building, no one else will have to contribute any cost then to that alley repair. Additionally, if we move on then, we have a blow up of the front of the building just to show we have a generous sidewalk, 20-foot wide, which does set up for outdoor seating for restaurants and cafes. This shows the loading area, and we're hoping this is a short term, and that's what this is intended to be, as a short term parking or loading area. We have all the compliant landscaping. We have external bicycle parking shown, and so that's our landscape plan. Moving on, there's 2 floors of parking. The second floor is all parking. I wanted to just show the third floor because in addition to the parking, we've also added a feature of some liner units. This is intended to better activate the street frontage so we don't just have a blank wall of a parking lot, and it works quite well. We then have the typical floor plan moving up the building, and you can see that bar scheme is thin and allows for setbacks on both sides, including the green roof. And this continues up the building to the 12th floor amenity deck. And again, you can see the bump out on the 12th floor. So the mechanicals and some amenity areas, there's a dog run, there's outdoor space and the pool. So that's the 12th floor amenity deck, an open space for the residents of the building. The building elevation, I have one in here. We have more slides that we can show, but I'm trying to keep this quick, and we'll open it up to questions as you deem necessary. But this sort of shows that predominant height that you can really see at 124 feet. It also shows the base of the building, really how pedestrians are going to experience this from a practical level at just over 39 feet. One thing else to note is that this base of the building was redesigned after working with Councilman Kelly and doing an architectural tour and exploring different alternatives, and that's been accepted by the folks, including Design Evanston. We wanted to, because staff included in the report sort of an evolution of where this project has been. You can see way back in 2017, they were proposing 25 stories, which was consistent with the building across the street at the Park Evanston. But over time, it's been reduced in height, and now you can see that here's where we have ended up at the current 12 stories. And, again, this is one of the big points here, and I think it's a testament to the team. We've had 2 community meetings. We've had meetings in the alley. We've had follow-up meetings at the church. We've met with Design Evanston. We've met with Bird Friendly Evanston, and lots of discussion with staff. And we're really trying to incorporate all of these different suggestions into the project as best we can, and be good listeners, and try to come up with the best project possible for the area. This view looking slightly northeast. Then we go on to the view looking south east, and seeing how we fit into the block. Here's a sidewalk view, kind of showing that wide sidewalk, what could be possible out here from a pedestrian experience, and the bike lanes over here to the right, and the landscaping. And then here's a straight-on view of the front of the building, and again, incorporating these design changes that we worked on together with everyone. And so I'll move on from the presentation. I wanted to say that, in connection with this proposal, with our plan development proposal, we have 4 what we think are modest site development allowance requested that are consistent with the zoning code for the D4 district. The 78 dwelling units were 54 allowed. As set forth on page 5 of the staff report, this density increase along this major arterial street in Evanston's mixed-use environment we think is appropriate and allows for additional on-site affordable units. Also, the project, as I mentioned, has currently 7 storefronts that are being replaced by 1 commercial space, so we think that there'll be less intensity there. And finally, in this post-COVID environment where less people are returning to office and still that's an issue for Evanston, we think that having as much density as possible on these kinds of sites will help increase the vitality of downtown, help with restaurants and other retailers, with people going in there. So we feel like that's an appropriate request and is supported by staff. The second request is this height. And previously there was a significant request. It's now down from a proposed 114 feet 7 inches. We're allowed 105 feet. We know that parking doesn't count towards that calculation. So we're really asking for a 9-foot 7-inch allowance, and certainly well within the code range, which allows for 40 feet. So we're just taking a portion of that is the request, and is set forth all over that staff report, pages 6, 7, 13, 15, and the favorable findings of Design Evanston, who we went through quite a review with them. We think that this is, they've said that this request is reasonable and allows for a thinner building with more setbacks, which mitigate the small height request. And that, together with those clear context images I showed you before, demonstrates the appropriateness of the building's height in the D4 transition district. And the building is also, should be noted that we are more than 2 full points of FAR less than what would be allowed. So you don't usually see developers leaving that much FAR on the table, but again, it allows for a building that's less massive and allows for those setbacks to mitigate. Our reduction in parking from 91 to 48 spaces. Again, we're in a transit served location. We have alternate means of transportation. I think that the city is trending towards less cars. It's interesting, as we've been talking, some people want us to have no parking. Some people want us to have more. I think we have struck a good balance. We think this works. And we also note, and staff has confirmed, that there's a lot of excess capacity in that Church Street parking facility. So to the extent that that's needed, we have that as relief. Finally, this reduction in the length of the parking spots. We have 2 of them. It's a pretty minor request. We want to go from, just by the configuration, we're going, requesting to go from 18 feet for 2 spots. And as we've noted, and I think we're in agreement, that would be a great place for a motorcycle to park or a zip car. And finally, to wrap up, is set forth in detail in our plan development application. The review and conclusions of Design Evanston, the various reviews by staff, and is further detailed in the staff report, and the findings. This project, we think, is pretty clearly meets the standards for special use and plan development. It doesn't have a substantial impact, an adverse impact on the use, enjoyment, and property values of adjoining properties in the downtown Evanston area. It's consistent with the character and trend of development in downtown Evanston. It promotes safety for pedestrians and vehicles. It aligns with the future climate goals. One of the things that I forgot to mention is part of our benefits, and early on, we, at the request, working with city, we are making this all electric for the residential portions of the building. And so that's a really good sustainability feature, a sustainable feature of the project. And also in terms of that alley management plan, in terms of safety, I just think it's important to note that there'll be cameras installed external, as well as lighting, bird-friendly lighting that will reflect downward. We've heard that stories about that alley, and if we're going to improve it, we want to try to keep it safe and monitor it as well. And we think that finally the public benefits are appropriate and material to the surrounding neighborhood and to the city. So with that, we stand ready to answer any questions or respond to comments, and I'll stop talking. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. I'll just make a quick statement before I go to that. Thank you for listening. I know we've been here several times, and it appears that discussions have been guiding this latest development from the community. So thank you for doing that. And I'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Halleck.
And I echo our chair's comments. I voted for the project last time, and I think this is much improved in so many different ways, including architecturally. I had one question for you and one question for staff. You actually mentioned something I was going to bring up. You mentioned zip cars. And could you, because I feel like when we're reducing parking, the philosophy of some people is that, well, people aren't going to drive. Well, I think people are still going to drive where they need to go. And if they don't have a car, which is expensive, and I understand that, they're going to need some way of driving. And if you could provide a couple of zip cars, I think that would make that situation better.
Yeah, absolutely. It is part of our plan. We've discussed it. Jeff has embraced that fully. So yeah, that is part of the plan.
And my second question is actually for staff related to this. A lot of the neighbors always on these projects complain that, well, even if you're not providing enough parking, people are not going to park in public lots. They're going to park on the street in adjacent residential neighborhoods. And in your report, the staff report, you said that the residents of this tower would not receive residential parking passes. What does that mean? Is there a restricted parking area around?
There is, yeah, to the east, on some of the streets to the east, there are parking pass permits.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. All right. That's the questions I had.
Thank you. I got a few questions. I'm actually new to this dance on this side of the table, so I wasn't here for the last iterations that this project's gone through, but I do have a few questions. The packet says that you have 6,800 square feet of retail, and you're discussing 7,300 square feet of retail. I'm thinking about the project on Main Chicago Avenue, which has the urgent care facility, and next to it has some vacant retail that tends to struggle because it's got a very high ceiling. And it's a big, it's not a big box, but it's a bigger box. And so my question to you is, how many square feet are you going to allow to subdivide your, let's call it 7,300 square feet of space? And by the way, the packet discusses 6,800 square feet, which includes a lot of square footage associated with core, like, storage and elevator and whatnot. So I'm assuming it's 7,300 square feet. So I'm curious about what your first about that.
So it is slightly confusing because the package we talk about 10,000, I think, is what the staff report notes, and we do have some basement space. So
Right.
that's not really active retail. That's intended to be storage. Like, for example, if it's a restaurant, they could be putting their dry goods or beverages in the basement. So really, we're talking about 6,700 square feet. The way it's set up, and I'll defer to Tim Kent for a moment. It could be three separate spaces.
Yeah.
But and the intention is to try to get a good restaurant and have outdoor seating and, but certainly if you, go ahead.
Well, a lot of this depends on the.
Could you just introduce yourself, please, for the
Tim
record?
Kent,
Thank you.
Papa George James Architects. It really depends on how this leases up. And so there's a certain inherent flexibility in the way the space is configured. So it could be 3 spaces, it could be 1 larger space. It really depends on who Jeff finds as a tenant. I think it's his hope that it becomes a restaurant space, and this would really be an ideal size for a single tenant restaurant, but it doesn't have to be that. I think you're asking about the height, though. The floor to floor here, I think, is 16 feet.
Right.
And so once you come down from that, by the time you consider the structure and mechanical and potential
Right.
ceiling, it really isn't overly sized. As
Closer
a matter
to
of
12.
fact, when we've dealt with retailers in the past, 16 feet floor to floor is about as low as they like. So that's been my experience.
Right. I'm just thinking about what's typical in our retail community here in Evanston. You look at a lot of the more successful streets that have a lower occupancy rate, the spaces tend to be smaller and older buildings tend to be shorter. And so that's been kind of the favorite retail profile for this town. I mean, we do have big tenants and we do have bigger spaces, but we also have some bigger vacancy associated with some of the newer structures. So that's why I was asking that. But if is it possible to divide this into 4 if you had to? Because that's a deep retail space. That's what, you got about 90 feet of depth there?
It's not 90, it's less than that, but it could be 4, but you know, there's not that much frontage. So,
I see.
So
I see.
it's really based more on
Narrows it up.
frontage.
Okay,
So it cleanly divides into 3.
it does. Okay.
But, or it could also really easily be 2.
So I want to talk for a second, and I won't take up too much time because I'm sure other people have thoughts about this project, but since I'm I'm going to just continue. There are roughly 78 units that constitute 1-bedroom or studios. So you're talking about a occupant that's likely 1 or 2 people. So it sounds to me like this has the potential to be collegiate style housing because it's close to the university. And I'm not opposed to collegiate style housing, but when you have 110, you're profiling 110 parking bicycle spots with lower parking, it's leaning towards that type of tenant profile. And I think it's a fair question. Is that how you see it?
I should really defer to Jeff on the market. I think we think it's open to everyone. It's certainly not intended to be student housing. But go ahead and talk about what you're.
Jeff Michael with Horizon Realty Group. I'm the applicant, the owner. We don't own student housing, and that's not what we do. We have 30 other buildings, and our forte is market rate housing. And we think this building will lend itself well to everybody. You're going to get young empty nesters. You're going to get retirees. You're going to get young couples. The makeup of 1-bedrooms is consistent with buildings of this size. The 1-bedrooms tend to be probably about 40% of the unit mix. So this was done with consulting obviously with Tim, but also we did a marketability study with IRR, got their input also, and that's how we landed on the optimal unit mix. So, and I think the rents that these are going to average, a 1-bedroom is going to average for about $2,500. It's probably a little bit out of an undergraduate student's price range. We may get some graduate students there, people that are associated with the university and other matters, but certainly not targeting collegiate housing, I should say.
Okay, I just felt like that needed to be asked and answered. That's great. Thank you. Also,
Can I just follow up on that
Yes,
question?
go ahead.
Precisely. I mean, what do you see of the 1-bedroom units, say, at the Marion?
The Marion Senior Housing.
I'm sorry, but you have other forgive me. But other 1-bedroom units in the area, do you have more information about like what profile of renters or people in those units come from in order to help answer that question?
Well, it varies. Like, for example, across the street at Park Evanston, I think they do have a higher student population. As you get closer to campus, obviously that student population level is going to go up. E2, I think, this is anecdotal because I don't have their information, but I think it's, probably more students housed there than your typical, if you go further east to, I'm sorry, further west to the newer developments along Ridge, it's just, that number's just, going to go down as you get away from the campus.
Thank you.
But I don't have hard data on these other developments in Evanston.
Thank you.
Yeah, the E2 project does have a lot of students in there, and their rental rates kind of track with yours. So students are capable of paying the rent that you're offering, particularly students that are attending a university that spends close to 80 grand a year now on tuition. They can come up with the money to.
The one thing I will say is, though, we don't customize our leases to the academic calendar, which is sometimes.
That's fair, yeah. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about was this internal trash. You have an alley here that you're saying you can pull truck into and take the trash, which sounds great. And this is a big report, so I didn't internalize all of it. So maybe the question is answered in there, but the turning radius in the parking in the alley, is that sufficient to be able to take a truck that you're going to back in a dump truck, like not a dump truck, a garbage truck, and maneuver that truck into your facility and then out? And is it one truck at a time that we're talking about, or two trucks?
Right. Yeah,
Oh,
so
they
we
did.
do
Okay.
have turn radius and diagrams in there that establish that we could make those turns. We've sent these exact plans to LRS and consulted closely with them. They've confirmed that the trucks that they use to pick up trash in that alley will fit, and they'll be able to basically do all their business within the confines of our property.
Okay. And lastly, ventilation and pest control, because this is something that, you have restaurants and you have humans, you have a lot of different kinds of trash coming in that can create some mischief. So what's going on with that?
I mean, like any of our other buildings, we have pest control at all of our buildings, don't have any issues there. And I've seen some older buildings, it's more of a challenge in older buildings. When you're building a newer building, which is relatively airtight and harder for rodent infestation, it certainly decreases the susceptibility to that issue. But we're on top of it. We're a professional management company. We'll have on-site management there. And, we aggressively just combat those issues.
Awesome. I'm sorry, I have one last question. You have 110 parking bike spots. With the growing demand for e-bikes, are you able to facilitate power down at that level for e-bike users, and how does that work?
We will. I'm facing this issue at another building, and what the city of Chicago has asked us to do is just have sufficient fire rating for that room, because you've heard these issues with the lithium batteries. I don't know if it's a 2 or 3 hour fire rating. Maybe Tim could better speak to that, but certainly have the ability to charge e-bikes in the bike room so they're not dragging them up and down our corridors, and also just to encourage them to buy them and use them.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Commissioner Foxell, do you have?
Sure. I just want to confirm that the one variance for the parking stall length, that's really only for 2 of the total parking spaces. That's correct. Okay, thank you. And then another question I had is about the loading zone on Chicago Avenue. I think it's a great idea to have that cordoned off as a special zone, seeing as you're going to expect a lot of deliveries and pickups and drop-offs and whatnot. I am a little concerned about how that intersects with the bike lane. Even in areas of Evanston where you have that interior bike lane, clashes with pedestrians coming in and out happen. And in this case, there's like a more concentrated area directly in front. Is there anything else that's part of the plan for that loading zone, such as more signage, lighting, or other kinds of technology to make that area more safe?
So great question. We're deferring to the city on this. We definitely think there'll be signage and lighting, and the details of how that exactly will work is still in progress. But we've been talking with staff quite a bit about this, as well as a lot of other alley management issues and loading and delivery issues. But it's a great point. We're aware of it. Staff's aware of it. And obviously this has to be done correctly. And obviously at some point people are going to have to look both ways before crossing, because bicycles are moving pretty quickly, especially with e-bikes. So it's something we're aware of. I think signage will be a big help. Maybe even raised. We've seen raised conditions in projects. I don't know if you guys have any comments on that.
Actually, I was going to ask about that from staff, so.
Yeah, we've talked to the applicant about possibly working with us to get some bollards or even some sort of barriers between the 30-minute parking lane and the bike lane to assist with these, pedestrian safety elements.
Would the city be open to a raised crosswalk? Is that something that we even consider? I know that's been bounced around on some other issues in the city, but I don't know if it's something the city's ever done or considering doing.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of uncharted territory, so we would want to confer with our Public Works Department and get their impressions on that.
All right.
And Commissioner, I mean, whether it's a parking spot, a standard parking spot that someone might park and walk into the building, or either way, that issue is
Right.
there, is present. So yes, agreed.
All right. Is that more?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to go to this end. I'm going to also note for the record, I should have done it earlier, that Commissioner Johnson joined us very early in the presentation, so he's been here for most of this. But I'm going to go to Commissioner Miranchev for any questions he has.
Quick question. Why don't you utilize the full basement? Is this just budget issue or there is significant infrastructure inside?
You know what? I'm going to defer to, is it Tim? Would you want to handle this, or Jeff? I think it's really just for storage, but go ahead.
Yeah, the short answer is we were putting the basement there just to help attract tenants. It's beneficial to them to have storage, especially if you're going to put a restaurant there. They don't want to use up expensive ground floor space for their back of the house matters. So that was the reason behind the basement.
My question, my intent is to ask, why don't you use the rest of the basement? Because you'll have a significant structural excavation and concrete work. You can utilize the rest of the, let's call it basement, for most of the things that are on your ground floor, and then use the ground floor for additional commercial space or even parking, whatever you decide.
Right.
I mean that in your case, it will be financially a good idea. That's why I'm asking why you don't do it.
Yeah, Tim, I think we've had these conversations in the past, and the numbers start to go up.
There's significant expense in constructing the basement itself, especially if we don't think it's necessary. And there's a limited return in terms of the amount of value in using the commercial space all the way towards the back. To the point of the question asked earlier, if it goes much further back, if it was retail space, it would become over deep and less desirable. So we just really don't think that a basement serves us very well.
So it's a matter of calculation of cost versus feasibility,
Well, cost,
let's call
and
it.
it's not just cost, it's also need. It's not really
Okay.
seen as being necessary.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Johnson?
I had one question about the southernmost, the southernmost of the retail spaces doesn't look like they have direct access to the alley, to the trash room, to the loading. Does that door in the southeast corner, does that open into the lobby?
So you're talking about this door
Right there, yeah. So you had mentioned that it was a lot of
The configuration and where the demising wall is sort of arbitrary on this plan. So to your point, I don't think that would actually happen because whoever that tenant is would need that access. So there would be a corridor placed somewhere there to accommodate that,
okay, so
rather than going through the lobby.
right, okay,
Yeah, we wouldn't do that.
okay, thanks.
Commissioner Mangum?
You hear me now?
I can hear you.
Hello? Okay, there we go. Thank you. The area on Chicago Avenue, Will it always be a loading zone, or are you planning to have, I think I saw something about 3 spaces that are 30 minutes?
So we're still working out that detail with the city. And we're obviously, we have to defer to the city and do what they want to do. It may be that it's a short-term parking where there's enhanced rate. Like, so it's, you've seen those with the pay and display when you use the app, that it costs much more because it's short-term. So it's really intended for standing loading. We would like it to be that. And so it's a question of what the city will and how they look at this. So we're working together still to flush out that detail.
Okay. And then,
I think Mr. Hubbard has something to add there.
And just to clarify, the city's position is to, and one of the conditions of approval that we've recommended is to have those spaces be 30-minute short-term parking spaces. That's consistent with what we've done in other areas of the city. And that allows additional, members of the public to use those for short-term parking for shopping. We certainly have the ability to change that. Moving forward, if for some reason we see after the building is occupied that is really not functioning well on 30-minute parking, we could look to make that a dedicated loading zone. But as of right now, we are recommending the 30-minute loading, 30-minute short-term parking.
okay. Thank you. And then I have another question. Did you consider underground parking instead of having it on levels 2 and 3?
We didn't, because the cost to do that would be really prohibitive to excavate. And I could defer to these guys to answer this, but go ahead and I'll let the architect answer.
There was an iteration of this project a few years ago where it was considered. It was also a much larger project, and the cost of that excavation work could be spread across a much bigger building. Now that the building has become smaller, it just isn't cost effective to consider a basement in this location.
Okay.
It's also not particularly efficient parking either. So,
Okay. Thanks.
I just have one quick question I want to address. So in the original, one of the things that you're requesting from us is an increase from 54 to 78 for the base units, not including any inclusionary housing bonuses or anything like that. It appears that we're getting the minimum of inclusionary housing that is required by ordinance, if I'm correct. Was there any consideration for increasing that number as we look at other projects that we've had come through, which have given a greater percentage in order to kind of make that trade-off?
It's something that we've heard in the last week only. So we've been working on the project for, this iteration for 9 months. And many of the requests and benefits that have been talked about are, again, the all-electric residential building, which was something we accommodated. Then there was design enhancements. Then there was the big thing is, of course, the alley and this cost for the alley, the $400,000. So when we looked at, and then there's other public benefits as well for scholarships, for training. You can see this all in the package. So when we look at the total package of the public benefits, we think that we feel very comfortable that we're at the higher end of what others have done. And we knew that all along we had heard favorably that we had complied with the IHO. And again, the project's gone on for a very long time. So we're comfortable with where we're at. It wasn't possible to do that at this point.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Liz Williams, for the record. I just want to clarify one statement of the applicant. The number and desire of staff to see more affordable housing units was noted in the staff review as part of the zoning analysis. So I think he mentioned that it was just a week ago that this was brought up. Staff has noticed this in previous reviews of the project.
All right, thank you.
I stand corrected. I didn't mean to suggest.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners right now? If not, we will go to public comment. Is this my entire list of people? Did everyone who wanted to sign up to speak have an opportunity to do so? I've got you on here. If you signed up online or in person, I just want to clarify before we get started. So I have I have 7 people signed up to speak this evening. The chair will grant 3 minutes to each member of the public to speak. I will read your name and just come up and state your name for the record. Again, I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name in advance. The first person I have is Milton Zimmerman.
Good evening. My name is Milton Zimmerman, and I live at 1629 Judson, so a hop, skip, and a jump from the property in question. And I just want to voice that we're excited with the prospect of welcoming all these new neighbors, bringing these new businesses to our block. We are so blessed to live in Evanston. We have a Whole Foods Market just a couple blocks away from where we live. Great restaurants like Tapas Barcelona and now Mench's. And we're excited with the idea that we would have this built and the possibility of some more restaurants and some more places for us to go and enjoy Evanston. You know, when you walk down or drive down Chicago Avenue, that part, that Whole Foods Market's kind of like the gateway south on Chicago Avenue, and there's a Whole Foods Market there, and this building will be there, and it would just really bring so much excitement and diversity to the neighborhood. Now, I know some individuals in the neighborhood have not been thrilled with the idea of bringing this project to fruition, so I just wanted to make sure that we got up here and let you know that there's a voice out there where there are individuals in the neighborhood who are excited. I consider myself to kind of be like a Evanston progressive, if you will, because I want to see progress in our neighborhood. So these folks have done pretty much everything you've asked. It's time to put a ribbon on it and bring it to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. The next speaker I have is Paul Breslin.
Yes, I'm Paul Breslin, 1635 Hinman, a block closer to this site than Judson. When I was young, I could have hit a baseball from my front door against the side of the proposed building. It's that close. I want first to correct a couple of things that keep coming up. I've been going to meetings about various iterations of this project since 2021, and everyone says, look at all these other tall buildings. Well, the Park Evanston is not in Zone D4. It's across the street. Someone said at the last ward meeting, isn't it silly to have one side of the street in this zone and the other side in the other zone? And I'm thinking, well, would you like to put the zoning boundaries in the middle of the block? How would that, if they're going to be zoning boundaries, that's where they would be. The buildings that are cited, like the Mather and 500 Davis, were built before the 2009 plan, which is where the 105-foot height limit comes from. And the Park Evanston is irrelevant because it's not in the same zone. So these things keep coming up. The other thing is the myth of the 20-foot alley. My wife, Jean, who is sitting back there, and I went out to that alley with a tape measure. The paved surface is 14 feet 10 inches wide. You could expand it a little, but there are these pipes, like inverted L's, going into the side of the church, and there are telephone poles. You could maybe squeeze another foot out of that alley. So it is not, for practical purposes, a 20-foot alley unless you can get rid of the pipes and the telephone poles, which I presume is not proposed. All right, that's out of the way. I will say that I think the architects and developer have done everything they could to make this building shoehornable into that site. But to quote an old song, the doctor did all the poor doctor could do, but he couldn't save Delia's life. The building is out of scale for where it is, not as egregiously as the iterations that have been flung at us since 2018, which bore no relation to zoning at all. But the alley is, as has been said, stressed. You're going to have 48 cars coming in and out of that alley that weren't coming before. There was the very good question about what happens with the intersection of the bike lane and the 3 short-term parking spaces and all of this stuff going on. I walk by that alley several times a week, and I've seen it in early afternoon blocked at both ends by trucks. I heard at one of the ward meetings a resident saying that she'd been trying to get out and the truck wouldn't move, and the guy threatened her with a gun. Now, that may be extreme, but it doesn't work, finally. Commendable effort, but it doesn't work.
The next speaker I have is Gretchen Brewster.
Oh, is Claire here? Oh, Jean, you can do it. I haven't done Jean's phone. I'm speaking. She couldn't make it.
Oh, she couldn't make it?
No, I'm going to leave her.
Okay. Come up to the microphone so we can hear you.
This is from Gretchen Brewster, whose address I don't have, but here's what she says.
1730 Hinman.
That's right, yeah. She says, if the proposed development of the 1600 block of Chicago Avenue is considered, I once again strongly, in caps, encourage consideration of the impact of wind, in caps, with such a structure. A major wind tunnel exists across the street. I have been literally swept off my feet with a baby buggy on certain windy days. It would seem that a similar situation could occur on the opposite side of the street of the 1600 block of Chicago Avenue with another large building, meaning no pedestrians would be safe walking down the street on windy days on either side. At very least, a thorough wind study must be undertaken before approval. Yes, and it is 1730 Hinman, Evanston. Thank you for...
The next speaker I have is Terry Wendt.
Hi, my name is Terry Wendt. I live at 807 Colfax Street, just down the street from Clare. I'm in the First Ward, and I'm a professional urban designer, so I'd like to comment on a number of aspects of this project. First of all, I don't understand why the city and the developer aren't working together to increase the number of units restrained only by the aesthetic factors of building height, and in particular, the other gentleman mentioned about a zoning differential between 2 sides of the street. That's not normal practice. Usually in a municipality, and I've consulted Libertyville to Oak Brook to Lake Zurich, a number of Chicago municipalities, and generally where we have zoning, or at least design considerations for zoning, they generally occur in the backs of the blocks, either whether there's an alley or not down the middle of a street. It becomes aesthetically disconcerting if there's a taller set of buildings on one side than there are on the other side. So first of all, I don't think that the developer's desire to please the city makes any sense. The city has created a successful downtown with numerous amenities, recreational, the beautiful library, all sorts of public amenities. And now now the implication here, and I'm new to this project, is that the city wants to put a lid on the number of housing units downtown. Well, that makes no sense, particularly on this site. Now, I have no skin in this game. I'm well aware of the skills of Papa George Hames, because I'm an urban designer as well, and you couldn't ask for a better architecture firm to understand contextual design than you've seen in this building. So I think that the city should, and I know this is a little late in the game, but the city should permit more units on this site. These are the kinds of units that require very few public amenities. They generate far more income. No school kids, I expect, or very few. So I envision, as a citizen and a planner in this wonderful city, I envision the city and the developer working together to maximize the number of units on this site, subject to specific traffic issues, specific aesthetic issues in terms of looking down a beautiful street, with landscaping and and it's nice that these buildings are perpendicular to the street too. It's not a street wall that's been created on along this street. So I guess those are my main points. By the way, more units will also reduce the pressure on rents in Evanston because the demand is so high. Well, the demand is a result of a successful city creating a central business district for itself. So the way, if you want to reduce rents and reduce the cost of housing, provide more units in downtown. And I'm also excited about this project. It's a beautifully designed project. I was in Whole Foods today, so I use all the retailers. I use restaurants. I use Whole Foods. It's a great downtown. I'm so happy to live in Evanston. By the way, I lived in the Park Evanston years ago. I moved to a historic courtyard building at Main and Hinman. I've lived on Judson and Dempster in a 2-flat. I've lived in every kind of housing in Evanston, and thank goodness Evanston is offering all these different kinds of housing, because that enables people to live here when you're just starting your career, and then when you're making enough money to buy a single family home. There's all sorts of price ranges. And then when I get older, I hope to stay in Evanston and find a multifamily building that I'll feel comfortable in, whether it's a rental unit or for sale unit.
Thank you, Mr. Wendt. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next up, I have Barbara. Okay.
My name is Barbara Revson. I live at 522 Church, and I would like to, at the outset, point out that my parking space at 522 Church is below ground. Half of the spaces you can't even see. They are above ground, and half of the spaces are below ground, and I cannot believe that those buildings that are currently where they want to build this building can hold that type of structure. So you're probably going to have to demolish them anyway, and you could then put your parking underground. I realize it costs more, but it also would be much better for the height of the building. But there is a bigger problem, and that problem is access to the alley. You go out on Davis Street, and it is a single vehicle exit. That's it. Unless they're willing to tear down part of the Marion, which they could do, there is no way you are going to develop any kind of access there that is at all going to handle the type of traffic that they're wanting to put in that alley. It just wasn't designed to do that. Maybe it should have been, but it isn't. And that means all the traffic will go down and exit on Church. That's also unacceptable. So it isn't whether or not this kind of development would be a good thing. It's that that site can't take this kind of development. And that isn't going to change unless they tear down the Marion.
Thank you. My next speaker is Bruce Bumberger.
Good evening. I'm Bruce Baumberger, live at 807 Davis, and would like to speak in favor of the project. We've seen many proposals over the last 4 or 5 years. I think the developers have listened very carefully to recommendations from city staff, from neighbors. It's been a very collaborative process this time around. You've heard about the discussions that have gone on across the board, and we see a lot of positive impact. It's a very great opportunity for us to improve the alley. That alley is one of the oldest in Evanston. Brick paved probably sometime in the 19th century, covered over with asphalt in a meandering sort of way. It is basically a disaster alley. So the opportunity for the developer to kick in, $400,000 toward alley paving is a windfall for the neighborhood and for downtown. So the project, as I see it, It's a very attractive design. They put a lot of effort into it. It looks terrific. I think very functional for the space. Yes, there's going to be some traffic issues, but I think those can be resolved. So let's continue on with the dialogue in terms of developing a good construction plan to manage the situation. Obviously, there'll be a lot of disruption during construction, and then look at the post-construction phase and figure out exactly how to manage the alley traffic. So let's do it.
Thank you. And the final speaker I have signed up is William Brown.
My name is Bill Brown. I live at 1200 Mulford Street. For 5 years as chairman of the board of the First United Methodist Church Board of Trustees, and with the assistance of Senior Pastor Grace of Matthew, I've advocated for our congregation of 700 people in objection to this building. I continue to serve this role now as trustee chair emeritus. With the third building design before us, we now have a structure of 135 foot height. It's still intrusive on the Lakeshore Historic District's architectural landscape to the east of it. A 105-foot zoning limit was established to protect this architectural context. Regardless of what may be allowed or not above ground parking in calculating the building's height, the building is still too tall. While there has been constructive discussion regarding managing traffic in the alley to the east, increased vehicular traffic will likely create difficult circumstances for access to and from the parking lot of the church and 1616 Hinman building to the south of the church. The building height and likely traffic congestions must remain an issue in the interest of the long-term architectural context of the Lakeshore Historic District and the functionality of the church parking lot. Please vote no for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. That is everyone I had signed up to speak this evening. Yes.
So,
If you could start with your name, please, and
okay,
address
I'm
for
Meg
the.
Welch in the 4th Ward. And there's a few things that I've heard tonight that I just want to address. Concerns about this building, some things that I think need to be challenged. One is the more housing units we have, prices or rents are automatically going to drop. I think this is a hackneyed sort of thing that gets said all the time. We need to think about how many housing units we would have to build for rents to really drop. And I suggest that Evanston would have to look like some of the hills, you know, the slums in Buenos Aires. For it really, we would have to build so much more housing for there to be a surplus. We'd have to have a surplus of housing for this to make rents drop. And what has happened in the past 5-10 years, we've had these developments. The argument has always been it's going to make housing more affordable because it will be more available. That has not happened. What you've seen is you've seen landlords in some of the older buildings look at what these newer landlords are getting in these high rises, and they say, why should I not get this? So they might do just a little cosmetic rehab, and they raise their rents to match the new developments. So I really wish that, you know, that phrase, you know, that is not, it's not a truism. There's more to economics than that, especially with housing. Housing is, units are not widgets. So just because you build more doesn't mean housing situation is very complex. So please keep that in mind. The other thing is that even though I believe that this is not planned to be housing for students, the leases are not written for students. However, it is the demographic it's going to appeal to. The idea that young urban professionals are going to flock to Evanston that work downtown is just not realistic. We don't have the nightlife here. It will be attractive to maybe retired people who want to rent. But the bottom line is when you build a building full of one bedrooms in this town, it's going to be primarily attractive to students, whether you plan it that way or not. So I hope you will take this into consideration, and there will be an impact on parking in the neighborhood. They will park on the street. So I'm not particularly supportive of this building.
Thank you, Ms. Welch.
I didn't get a chance to sign up. Can I speak?
Real quickly, though.
Okay. My name is Michelle Zimmerman, and I live at 1629 Judson, and I am for this new development. My first point is we live in a college town. This college was here before any of us moved in, unless someone's over 100 years old here. So you're going to have to expect when you build a building, you're going to have students living there. And I think that's fine. I don't see any problem with students living there or a mix of business and professional people living there. My second point is I'm glad that alley is getting fixed. That's a scary alley. I walk by there every day. If I walk by there at night, I actually walk in the street because that alley's too dark. There's people a lot of times that are lurking in that alley. I've had someone jump out of that alley at my son at night. I think the developer is really doing a good job by offering to fix that alley for us and light that alley. And I actually think the more traffic in that alley, the safer that alley will be. When I look down that alley at night and it's pitch dark and there's no one there, that scares me. If I see bikes and cars and people coming in and out of that alley on a regular basis, I feel better as a woman walking past that alley. So I see a lot of positives in this building, and I feel like a lot of people that don't seem to be for this building are people that maybe wouldn't be happy with any idea of change or something being torn down or something new being built. So, and I live at 1629 Judson, so I feel like I'm pretty close, and I think it'll affect me positively if this building gets built.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman. At this point, I'll turn it back over to the applicant. You've heard some of the concerns raised in the neighborhood. If you want to respond to those, or if you just have a final summation that you would like to make, you also can avail yourself to that as well.
Thank you. Well, keep it very short. In terms of just a couple of points, the alley traffic, again, there's currently, because of the 7 different commercial storefronts, there's 7, right now it's vacant and it's sort of obsolete retail, but historically there's been 7 different commercial places with 7 different dumpsters and 7 different loading schedules, and there's a parking lot back there. And the parking lot has a lot of activity in it. All that is going away with this more consolidated building with internal activities. So yes, there's 48 more cars. However, I think that it's not fair to say that it's 48 compared to 0 because there's already the delta between what's there now and these 48 is de minimis. That's number one. And just in terms of, so I think that and what we already know is that when we've heard tonight from some that the alley is not in good shape. And this project, if nothing else, does improve those conditions because of what I just mentioned and because of the physical improvements and the management improvements. So we think that that's a benefit. In terms of extra cars in the area, again, there's a parking lot and we know this, there's been recent reports in the paper. There's a lot of extra capacity at parking lots. So it's a win-win for the city if there are extra cars to warehouse them for the weekends in this parking lot that's a half a block to our north. In terms of the building itself, again, there's been a lot of effort made to listen, to reduce density, height, mass, and improve architecture. So we think that where we're at right now as compared to other projects, as compared to the trend of development, as everything we understand about what the city is looking for, this building, furthers those goals. And we really respectfully request your favorable opinion for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any last questions for the applicant? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and close the public record so that we may begin our deliberation. I have just a couple quick questions for staff that came up during comments. There was a request about a wind study. Has there been anything to that effect? Is that something we would normally require from an applicant? Does staff have any concerns about that?
Staff defers to the commission on whether or not you feel that is appropriate, and suggests that that be something brought forward before it travels to the city council for consideration.
All right, thank you. The other thing was we've heard some discussion about an alley plan in terms of management of the alley, and I'm assuming that will be handled just like a construction management plan or any of the other types of plans that we have a developer go through. So I don't really want to belabor that at this particular point. Lots of that stuff will be in there. There was a comment made that the alley is actually closer to 15 feet. Is it?
I'm hearing 16 to 22 feet is what Public Works has confirmed. It does vary in width at some points.
Okay. All right. Thank you. With that, I will ask commissioners to give general thoughts on the project. Commissioner Halleck, would you like to begin?
Yeah, just to comment on the wind study. As a professional who has been through the design phase of several high-rise projects, those studies are usually done for buildings that are 50 to 100 stories. It's just not done for a building as short as this building. So based on my experience, in summary, I guess I could list a lot of things that I think are positive about this project, but I won't. It's already been said. I just want to say that I think I agree with all of the positive comments that have been made on this project, and so I will be voting for it.
Commissioner Mabadi?
Yeah, I mean, the project, I'm kind of along with the gentleman that was talking about needing more housing, and we have a movement in our community to expand housing. So it is incongruent to do smaller housing development where they're on a site that you could build more housing. But we're here, this is what, the fourth iteration that this has been through. And so this is where it is. This is a smaller project. The parking is, I'm always worried about parking. Maybe I'm a little old school on that. I think we have more parking needs than we think, but the parking lot next to the building on Church Street across the street mitigates that issue. So I think that's a solvable answer. I think the aesthetic of the building is wonderful. I mean, it sits back nicely. It's not like creating a wall in the middle of the street. So it kind of complements a little bit what's going on with the Marion, where you have that open, L-shaped experience above the retail. So I'm for this.
Can I add one more thing? Michael mentioned the thinking about zip cars. I'd like to make that part of our recommendation, that they provide zip cars.
And we'll get to that when we go through all of the public benefits and stuff. Commissioner Puctel.
Yeah, I'm happy with the project. I think that there are many parts of the design that are really attractive and I think have been done really well. I think the setbacks are great. I think the vehicle access off the alley is a great idea. The all-electric plan inside is all commendable. It's really a great design. Since this project has been through several iterations, the key in my mind about appropriateness, about size and bulk, has been this concept of the transition downtown district and trying to figure out what is appropriate as a transitional bulk and density. And I think in its current form, the design has achieved that intent. I still remain very concerned about the safety of the pedestrians in front, and once we talk about that, I'd like to make a recommendation for some aggressive measures to ensure pedestrian and bike safety.
Thank you. Commissioner Runchev.
I will vote yes for the project, but I will afford to make some recommendations. First, recalculate the basement. I'm pretty much sure that if you make a full basement and drop all the utilities that you have on the ground floor down in the basement and use the ground floor either for commercial or for parking or for whatever you decide, you'll be better. Besides, you'll have significant structure that will go down depending on the soil report. Probably you'll need a concrete mat. Probably you'll go like 20 feet down. So you'll have enough room to make a basement that you can use for whatever you decide. I would recommend dropping down the mechanicals, all of these things, and use the ground floor for commercial or for other uses. Second, last time I talked about this, I want to raise this again. You have 40 units that have only north exposure. 40 of 110. This is 40% apartments that will not see sun. This is architectural, it's not zoning. But think about it. You have balconies on the north side. These balconies are never used. Make them part of the rooms inside. And with this projection, you'll have one east and one west window for each apartment. And this will resolve it. There are other architectural things that you can apply. Think about it. This is, once again, maybe out of this discussion and the zoning issues, but I want to point to that. And third, opposite to other opinions, I think that you can improve the building, the facade, the appearance of the building. Showing it as a glass block is a little bit deceiving because you show it almost as transparent. It will not be transparent. Everybody will use his or her blinds, curtains, whatever. It will be a block. So if you make a little bit articulation of architectural elements, I would say mostly horizontal, so that you make it look not so tall, it will benefit the building. Besides, too much glass, it was very modern a little bit while ago, not so much these days. So make it a little bit better. Just friendly advice. Otherwise, I'm okay with your requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this version of the project. I think it's an improvement over there have been a number of improvements from previous proposals. The building at this iteration's height, it represents a nice transition from the taller buildings in the downtown core. This is a very transit-oriented location. As we've heard, the garage across the street has excess parking capacity. So in our packet, it says something about utilizing existing municipal infrastructure, but it also helps to soak up excess capacity for municipal infrastructure that already exists in that area. We can also talk about supporting existing government infrastructure like the trains that are in close proximity. I like how the project utilizes the alley for trash and recycling pickup. It does not have a curb cut. It minimally impacts the bike lane. And I appreciate that change. And overall, this project adds population and vitality to the city's core. And we know that there are a lot of underutilized and somewhat struggling commercial retail spaces in our downtown, and it's an initiative of the city to have more housing. And I feel like this project serves those purposes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Mangum.
I plan to support the project. I think it's a great location. It appears that the developers and the parties involved have been, working with the city on this for several years, and they've made numerous changes to accommodate some of the concerns of the neighbors in the area. So I would support it.
Thank you. Could you bring up the slide with the 4 iterations of this project? I don't know what page it is exactly in your presentation or where it lives exactly. There, thank you. So obviously, we've heard this case a couple times before. In terms of looking at kind of where we started, where we've been on this particular project, I think we've definitely made great progress here. I think that the developer has listened to concerns from the neighborhood, from the city. I think some of the things that we continue to discuss are going to be problems no matter what happens in this particular lot. We always seem to have a little bit of a problem when alleys share space between residential and commercial. We have it on just about every place along Hinman in Chicago. We have it along Howard Street and the alleys behind that with the streets behind that. So it's kind of a citywide problem, and it's just one of those inherent things that is an issue. And I don't think anything in particular is going to remedy that particular issue. I do like the idea that in trying to figure out what to do, there is an alley plan being developed to sort of coordinate to reduce the amount of traffic, especially from service vehicles during that time. Obviously obviously residents come and go at various times and you can't control that. But anything that can be done to limit the number of trucks that go up and down the alley is definitely an improvement. I like the fact that the building is being set back, but does have a facade that makes it feel like part of the streetscape. It nicely ties into surrounding buildings because of that, but yet does create air and movement around the building and light around the building. So I'm very impressed by that. So I want to go through, we do have some standards to go through, but before I go through that, I want to talk about some of the department recommendations. These are on page 17 of our packet. The first one being the 3 parking stalls immediately in front of the subject property changed to 30-minute maximum metered stalls. We've heard some discussion from staff that that's where they'd like to begin, but this project can change and adapt, obviously, as those spaces are being used. One of the problems we always have with protected bike lanes is that you ask pedestrians to cross a pedestrian bike lane, or I'm sorry, a protected bike lane. And so there's always a potential for conflict, for issues to arise. And I think that the city can look into some of those options that we've talked about. And I think you might have some specifics about that you want to maybe make recommendations on to further that. The second is the subject property shall be operated in substantial compliance with the alley management plan. Again, this is something that we typically would look at doing. The residential tenants being prohibited from obtaining on-street residential parking passes. I wish we could find a different way to word this in the future. The people who live here are residents, and by phrasing it in the way that we often do, it makes it sound like they are not. So I don't have a problem with it, but I think we just have to figure out a better way of wording that. There's discussion about obviously having a construction management and staging plan before it moves on to planning and development with city council. So that would be something that would be expected. The next one just kind of goes into some more of the details about the construction management plan. Compliance with the inclusionary housing ordinance, the green building ordinance, the bird-friendly building design ordinance. These are things that have all been discussed during the planning process. Again, I would just say that I wish there were a way to get more than just the minimum of inclusionary housing, but I understand there are budgets, there are financial considerations, and when you're looking at the overall benefits that are being provided by the city, you pick and choose which ones work. The other one being obviously anything that would encroach upon the public right-of-way that the appropriate application or the appropriate permits be acquired for any balconies, canopies, anything like that that may encroach into the right-of-way. Next one, that the building be maintained to allow adequate egress through the subject property for any buildings that surround it so that obviously people don't have to go all the way to the end of the block to get around the building if necessary for some reason, especially with like issues with life safety, those sorts of things. Those are the staff recommendations that have been put forth. Does staff have anything else that they would like to put in or clarify?
I think that summarizes it pretty well.
All right. There are public benefits that have been talked about. These are not really in our purview. These become more of a city council issue. But I will note for the record that they are on page 16 and 17, which includes such things as the alley improvement, transportation improvements, apprenticeship programs, that sort of stuff, which are all listed in that section and will be moved forward to City Council, and City Council will have more discussion on those issues. With that, I will go into, again, we do have a series of standards that we must find are met. You're going to start with the plan development ones. In order to make a positive recommendation to City Council, this commission must find that these standards are all met or produce conditions that would allow them to be brought into compliance, in our opinion. The first one being the requested site development allowances will not have a substantial adverse impact on the use, enjoyment, and property values of adjoining properties. It is beyond a reasonable expectation given the scope of the applicable site development allowances and plan development location. Obviously, we've had much discussion over the years about the height of the building, the bulk of the building, the density of the building, all of these issues. We've slowly been moving towards something that I feel that we, as a commission, find acceptable. This is a transitional area, so there will be a height difference. I think Mr. Wendt, if he's still here, raised the issue about, dividing down the middle of a street. That's not something that we can change right now, but that's the way that the city has decided to give it. So we have to interpret based on the city's existing division lines. The second one is the proposed development is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. Again, this isn't our downtown core area, our downtown transitional area. We do expect to see greater height there. In looking at the buildings that we have along this side of the block, between at both ends, we have much higher buildings than we do along the center of the block. But I think that with the setbacks that are proposed, that this project is keeping itself in with the character of this particular block and with our downtown. So that standard is met. Number 3, the development site circulation is designed in a safe and logical manner to mitigate potential hazards for pedestrians and vehicles at the site of the immediate surrounding area. I will also add bicyclists in there at this time because obviously we have a protected bike lane there. Anytime you bring more people in, there's going to be more traffic, whether it be foot traffic, bicycle traffic, or car traffic. This is one of our major roads through town, Chicago Avenue. And there are ways that we can try to accommodate all of these modes of transportation and try to make them all work together. Obviously, the greatest of which is having no curb cuts on the property so that we don't have cars crossing those bike lanes, but taking everything in off the alley as well as the loading zones off the alley. So this makes sense, and I believe that standard is met. The proposed development aligns with the current and future climate and sustainability goals of the city. There are several things that we've talked about here with the green building ordinance, the bird-friendly ordinance. So I believe that those standards are all met and will be attained through the actual finalized process of permitting and final plans. And finally, the public benefits that are appropriate for the surrounding neighborhood and the city as a whole will be derived from the approval of the requested site development allowances. Again, I ran through some of those, but I think the greatest one that we keep hearing about is the alley improvement for this particular site. And having that alley improved is something that seems to be long overdue. Is everyone in agreement with my finding on the plan development standards? All right. The next set of standards are special uses. All planned developments are a special use, so there is some repetition here in these standards. The first one is that this is one of the special uses specifically listed in the zoning ordinance, and we find that it is. The second is that it is in keeping with the purposes and policies of the adopted comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time. This one's a little interesting because obviously we're in the process of revising our comp plan and our zoning ordinance. But a number of the things that we see and hear that we've talked about before are actually just being codified into these new documents, as well as moving forward with looking toward the future. So the fact is that, obviously we want to have increased development. We want to have increased density in the downtown. That's always been a plan. And this is a project which achieves both of those. C, it will not cause a negative cumulative effect when its effect is considered in conjunction with the cumulative effect of various special uses of all types in the immediate neighborhood. This kind of dovetails into the first standard on the planned developments. This is an area where we expect to see higher density. We expect to see higher height. And so the fact that this property has been looked at several times and has been developed to a scale that the Land Use Commission feels is appropriate and should limit its negative effect on the surrounding properties. It does not interfere with or diminish the value of properties in the neighborhood. Again, this was something that we talked about a little bit just previously. The fact that we are bringing additional properties into the neighborhood brings more vibrancy, more density into the neighborhood. These are things that everybody seeks and should show an increase in values of properties in the neighborhood. It can be adequately served by public facilities and services. Obviously, this is a 110-unit building. There will have to be accommodations made for bringing in additional electric, especially as they lean into the electric initiatives. But there's no reason to believe that all of that cannot be accomplished. Does not cause undue traffic congestion. We've heard some comment about the congestion that could potentially be created in the alley, as well as anything that would happen along the front of the property with the 3 parking spaces and people crossing the protected bike lane. I don't believe that any of these are excessive and that the surrounding neighborhood will make accommodation and be able to absorb these in without a great problem. Preserves significant historical and architectural resources. Obviously, there aren't any at this particular site, so that standard is met. Preserves significant natural and environmental features. Obviously, there's very little here in terms of environmental features. There will be a landscape plan developed to bring additional landscaping into the area, and will also create additional environmental features which currently do not exist on this particular site. And the last one is it complies with all other applicable regulations of the district in which it is located, except as modified through plan development process. There's no reason to believe this particular applicant actually owns the building next door. And to my knowledge, we've not had any problems with that particular site through the city receiving complaints. And they seem to be more than willing to work with the city on all of the necessary permits and meeting the additional requirements that would be imposed for this particular project. So that standard is met. Is everyone in agreement with my findings on the special use standards?
Yes.
All right. So now we will move to, we ran through the city's recommendations. Is there anything from commissioners that they would like to add in or clarify on those conditions? I think, Mr. Patel, you have something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a condition, and I'm going to make it vague, just that simply the applicant and city staff work together to consider aggressive measures to improve safety out in the likely intersection in that space in the loading zone in front.
All right, thank you. Any other conditions?
Also, that the applicant provide at least 2 Zipcar spaces as part of the development that are available to the tenants.
All right. Anything else, Commissioner Johnson?
To the tenants and the general public, or just the tenants? Just the tenants, okay.
Well, I don't think it works that way. I think it's, if you sign up for Zipcar, you can get a Zipcar in your neighborhood. It's not like you can restrict it to.
My thought on this is that if the tenants don't have a car, then they should have access to Zipcars. If it's open to the rest of the neighborhood or the rest of the city, those Zipcars might not be available for the tenants. So that's my thinking. I don't.
Mr. Hubbard, do you have?
So first of all, I would encourage the commission to consider a more general statement. I don't know if we want to limit it to zip cars, maybe just car share opportunities. And it works in the reverse too. I mean, any resident, let's take Zipcar for example, that signs up for Zipcar in this building, if there's a Zipcar in the building next door, they can also use that if the one in their building is used by somebody outside of the building or within the building. So I think it would be hard to restrict it just to the building residents. And that would probably go against the way that the companies are run, to be honest.
My concern is that it would defeat the purpose that I'm after if these Zipcars are available to everyone in the city.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, the reverse is true.
I think the benefit becomes that when you identify Zipcar spaces or designated car sharing spaces, that there are them, sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. But you have a designated spot for them, so they do show up there. They do return there.
Well, if we can't do it the way I asked, then what can I say? But if they have to be available to the general public, then at least there are Zipcars.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Is that there is a benefit, although it's not a guaranteed benefit each time.
I think it's still a good idea.
Yeah. So adding in a car sharing and having the city look at an aggressive plan to ensure safety where pedestrians and bicyclists meet in the cross are the 2 new conditions that have been requested. With that,
I have one thing.
Yep, Commissioner Embody.
So question I have for staff is, do we know if there's Zipcars currently available at the parking facility that's across the street from the condominium building that's on the corner, it's next to this? Yeah.
I don't believe so. I checked earlier this week. There were some Zipcars available, I believe, in the E2 building, and there were some further west of this site. I do not recall if there were any in the Church Street garage just to the north or in the garage just to the west.
So who typically drives this in terms of advancing the availability of ride sharing? Is this a city function or is it a developer function typically?
Yeah, that's typically a private function. It's something we could consider in our upcoming zoning code, work, but right now it's a private function. Yeah.
So if we did put Zipcars in this development, how would it would have to be available to anybody? So how does that work from a security standpoint? If we were going to put a vehicle that anybody could get to, how would they do that with this design?
I think you'd probably want to address that to the applicant. I mean, there could be some check-in at the lobby, but, I'm sure they probably have facilities that they have Zipcars.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that.
I don't think this is the first time this would be the type of situation. So I'm sure whoever the car share program they decide to go with has whatever accommodations they can make. Because you usually have to gain access to the vehicle through some means, and those vehicles aren't always in an open public lot. So, I mean, they would be in buildings sometimes and things like that. So, All right. Actually, no. You know what our concerns are, and you can work with staff on the fine details of that. But the record is closed at this point. Anything else anybody wants to add? And if not, would someone be willing to make a motion for recommending approval of this project?
I can do it. I move in the case of plan development at 1621-1631 Chicago Avenue, 24 PLND-0036, that we recommend approval to the city council with the conditions as listed in the packet on page 17, in addition to the one we mentioned about the safety in the loading zone in front, and the one about zip cars or similar being available on the premise.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Second. Was that Commissioner Halleck? Were you the second? Okay. Been moved by Commissioner Fotel, seconded by Commissioner Halleck. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Jones, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Halleck?
Aye.
Yes. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Mabadi?
Yes.
Commissioner Mangum?
Yes.
Commissioner Marinchev?
Yes.
Commissioner Foxtel?
Yes.
Chair Rogers?
Yes. So with a vote of 7-0, the matter will move forward to City Council through the plan development. Obviously, the developer knows there's a few things that they need to do before it gets to that phase, and I'll let you work with staff on figuring out all of those details. Good luck with your project moving forward. I'll give a moment for those of you here who were here for that case to sort of leave the room before we begin our next discussion, which will be on landscape and green space in the new ordinance documents. Actually, let's take a like a 5-minute break. We'll go back on the record. We're a minute early, but the next item that we have on our agenda is a discussion item. As we move through the comp plan and new zoning ordinance, staff has arranged for certain discussion topics to be presented to us so we can have provide some input, have some discussion before we actually get to the final document, and help shape it maybe a little bit before. These come through referrals through City Council. And so I believe, Ms. Jones, you are going to be leading the discussion on this one.
Yes.
And I'll just ask you to do a quick summary on what's being presented to us and what you want to hear from us.
Sure. So again, as you mentioned, this is coming about from a referral that was provided in July to update the zoning code to include landscaping standards that would help the city to increase its urban tree canopy. So helping the city to reach its sustainability goals and help the city to align with our climate action and resilience plan. So currently our zoning code is extremely broad when it comes to landscaping requirements and doesn't provide much in the way of specific guidelines and requirements for what should be included, and there's some gaps in what should be required. We do have standards for planned developments that, again, are very broad. It's just pretty general requirements or more suggestions for providing a landscape plan that speaks to different species, where they might be planted, and also requiring something that resembles something like some kind of maintenance for what's provided, but this is specifically for planned developments. So what we have this evening as part of the meeting documents is a set of very draft guidelines and regulations that were provided by ZoneCo. So these speak to more specific standards with regards to the amount or percentage of a particular lot that should be landscaped, including very specific standards with regards to percentage of native plantings, the diversity of plantings, and even like the spacing of plantings. It also provides a little bit more information or suggestions for regulations with regards to having buffers between different uses, as well as some background information providing some more direction for landscaping requirements for parking lots. So that's a very quick overview of what's provided. I will emphasize again, these are very preliminary and draft regulations that are included in the meeting materials, and staff is already looking at some things that we would want to revise. But for this evening, we really want to get your initial thoughts on what has been provided and what you think of the framework that was provided, or if there are very specific parts of these specific regulations that you think should be reworked, added to, omitted, whatever would be best for.
Can I start out with a general question? At the end of the report, you list other cities that have adopted similar things. But as I read through the list of cities, it seems like most of them, they weren't mandatory. They were suggested standards. And so I guess when I look at how this covers single family units and all the way up to PDs, I just wonder if this is way too intrusive on, private rights. That's a general comment of mine. I just can't imagine telling a single family homeowner, I own a single family home, that they have to put a tree in their yard or landscape their yard in a certain way. So I have a problem with the mandatory, except where it's a PD or using public funds or a project like that. So that's a general comment. I have specific questions too, but I just.
Can I ask a related question?
Yeah. This is a discussion, so
Okay.
it's kind of casual, and as long as we aren't talking over each other,
Okay.
feel free to.
Because I had a similar thought, and I wanted to ask Megan, specifically the box at the bottom of page 6, additional requirements regarding planting specifics include in the native plants, diversity, invasive species, trees. It's all great. But what property types would that be applicable to? Would that?
I think the intention is for this to just be broadly applied.
Okay. So all types of properties. Because I thought about my property, and I don't think it's possible to put a tree in my front
But keep in
yard.
mind that this isn't saying everyone needs to go do this right now in their properties. These are requirements for new construction.
Right, but sure.
But are they?
But to that point, my thought was there's so many exceptions at sites that have exceptions where this just wouldn't apply. So if there's so many exceptions to a rule, maybe the rule shouldn't be there.
So this doesn't just apply to new construction according to the memo, because it says as well as additions and renovations over a certain size.
Right. Current activity.
Right.
That's not true.
So
That's not true.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm looking at page 7. There's a list of green space planting requirements included. It starts with any residential units, and it goes all the way down to institutional.
But that what they're saying though is at the very beginning they talk about the applicability.
Yeah, right above that.
And it on page 4.
Or 7. Right above where we were reading.
And it says there that these standards will apply to new construction as well as additions and renovations over a certain size that has not yet been determined. So they aren't going to come to you in your current status and say, George Halleck, you have to put a tree on your property today. The thing is, if you put an addition onto your house of a certain size, then there is an expectation that you would do these things. I agree wholeheartedly that this is. I agree wholeheartedly that this is a little heavy-handed, and it isn't really applicable across the board. And I think I can think of so many exceptions to the rules that when we start talking about some of these things and being so prescriptive, which I find a little odd, we're talking about changing our zoning ordinance so that it becomes less prescriptive and that people don't have to come and get permission for each and every little thing. But then we're going to turn around and say, oh, by the way, but when you do, here's the plants you plant. They have to be exactly this in these places, because some of these places on my property, and I'm not a single family homeowner. I live in a condo courtyard building. This stuff is impossible, both because we don't have the natural environment for it. Anything that I plant would be in the courtyard is in shade for the most part. So you can't have me plant a shade tree in the middle of a courtyard. And I think we get really, really prescriptive and a little vague in some areas where we talk about natural landscapes. Well, what is a natural landscape? What happens if we start saying, well, you know, we want pollinator gardens? Okay, that's something a little more specific. Natural landscapes, anything you find in nature anywhere is a natural landscape. I joked earlier with staff that I want to put a tar pit in my front yard. That's a natural landscape. So we have to be kind of careful in defining what terms are and what they mean and how we expect to do that. I think the stuff that is presented on page 4 that lists the intent of these particular things is great. And I think that that's what we need to lean into without getting into so much specificity about individual properties. You know, promoting environmental sustainability, enhancing green infrastructure, reducing urban heat islands, supporting carbon sequestration efforts, you know, improving stormwater management. These are things that we always are working on. Enhancing biodiversity. This is key. We had the emerald ash borer a few years ago. It took 19 trees off my street. So we lost all the mature tree canopy because somebody had planted every tree basically being the same. The only trees that weren't ash are American elm, which are an at-risk tree as well. You know, elevating aesthetic quality. You know, this really kind of becomes very arbitrary and subjective about what is beautiful landscaping look like. Supporting climate resilience, you know, having adaptive landscaping practices that respond to climate changes, something that definitely we should be working on. But I think when we start getting into very, very specific things, it creates lots of problems for us. I looked at Ann Arbor's plan because one of the things I looked at too is in looking at the cities that were presented, who has similar climates to us, because that's something that is affected. I mean, we have a 4-season, actually we kind of almost have 2 seasons now. We're down to winter and summer. But some of these places have a much milder climate than we do, or a different structure entirely. So I went to Ann Arbor to look at what they do. And they have, not as part of their zoning ordinance, but its own separate, very detailed ordinance about the types of plants, how to plant intelligently, these sorts of things. Because I just have the feeling that we're going to start adding on to people's bills big time if they want to do landscaping. By saying, these are what you have to do, you have to buy this many of them, and they have to be planted in these ways. Which can be cost prohibitive to some people. So I think we need to have something that's a little more flexible. I think we can be a little more prescriptive when it comes to planned developments, because that's something where people are coming and asking the city, hey, we want something, okay, here's what we want in return. I mean, I hate to use the term negotiation because I know that's a negative word right now as we're going through this process, but that's really what it is the trade-offs. We're interested in creating a more green environment, and buildings that go lot line to lot line without anything there maybe isn't what we want to see anymore.
Except in certain places.
Except in certain places where it does make sense. And, you know, putting green rooftops on new buildings downtown is different than asking a 3-story condo to put a rooftop deck or a rooftop garden on their property. So that's where I would like to see us move with this, and I maybe have kind of talked quite a bit, but I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in. Commissioner Mangum?
I agree with most of, I agree with a lot of the suggestions that were previously made. Landscaping is expensive, and it could be burdensome to require, someone to put a communal garden or change landscaping in general, because once you start changing landscaping, there also could be a risk of flooding to either your own place or your neighbor's place. So I think suggestions would be okay, but not requirements. Like, I wouldn't want to see residents fined for not having enough trees or not having the right garden or anything like that.
I want to talk about parks a little bit. First of all, I've gotten some calls from people that are on the parks board, I think they are, and they've said that they're not being listened to. I don't know if that's right or wrong. I just thought there's no one here to voice that, but I thought I'd mention that. But a couple of specifics, like you say that somewhere it says in here, 80% of parks should be native plants. Well, I thought that, isn't parks for recreation, and isn't recreation, lawns and, play areas, and they're not native plants. So there's some requirements in here that just don't make sense to me. The 10% for buildings over 20 units, 10% of the area devoted to a deck, that's huge. That's just a huge requirement, and I think it's just not doable, not economically doable. So there's a lot of just little things like that. Oh, one more thing about parks. When you say in here there's a statement about expanding parks, is there any thought as to where or what the attitude toward the city would be? The city owns some land. I know. Where would you locate these parks? I think that's sort of a conceptual thing that this report could address, that, in a little bit more detail, like where parks.
And I think one of the other things to do is to remember that we're not the only park district in the city. And so Ridgeville is a park district.
Is that right?
And they do not have home rule, I don't believe. So anything that we kind of make as requirements could be impacting the other park district as well. So I think that's something that we need to have a discussion with Ridgeville at some level before we start putting a bunch of rules on their properties and not having a discussion about what, or exempting them or whatever we want to do. But there needs to be that discussion as well.
So I had a couple of thoughts about this.
Is your microphone on?
Yeah, it is. Okay. So I think that we have to look at what the problem is that we're trying to solve and see I just don't feel like the canopy is a single-family residence problem. I mean, if the issue here is to enhance canopy, is to create more green space, to create more, all these different things that we're talking about doing, I think the homeowner is not. I drive around, everyone's taking care of their yards, everyone's trying to landscape, and people spend tons of money on this stuff. So I don't know that we need to start putting our thumb or a boot on the neck of the homeowner that's already stressed with trying to pay his taxes and pay his kids' college tuition, or like I have, or whatever you got going on. And now you got to now have a landscaping plan to meet the city's new ordinance. I just think that's wrong. But if we're talking about parks, of course, or if we're talking about city-owned facilities, of course, or if we're talking about plan unit developments, PUDs, and like a couple sessions ago, we were talking about redeveloping some sites that were possible to do if the dirt wasn't dirty behind, like back behind the Greenwood and behind the Dempster Dodge retail facility. So like those areas, we got to absolutely pump in a lot of green. I think that makes a lot of sense to me because we want to create new facilities need to kind of like emulate what's been going on the last 100 and 150 years here. I mean, you go up and down these streets, we have big trees. I mean, where they're getting cut down, we got to put some back. I mean, that's what we're doing now. So I feel like that this needs to be carefully considered when you're talking about how much press you want to put on the homeowner. I think that makes me nervous.
This Carf, it's not just the homeowner, it's the courtyard building, it's the,
Right.
Right. Those buildings too.
Right. But they're not building, well, yeah. Like this development here, where would they put green? It's limitations, it's.
Yeah, and some of that is, there's roof, but I mean, obviously planting shade trees on roofs is not easy to do. It's doable, but it's going to cost a lot of money and require extra engineering.
Right. So that thing would be enough. Yeah.
So I guess my question to staff is, I have a feeling that you want us to give you direction here on kind of what we're thinking. I think most of us who have weighed in have kind of all pointed in the same direction that we aren't really in favor of a mandatory, especially when it comes to things other than planned developments. So I guess that's kind of our direction.
Yeah, I think if I could share, I really appreciate the feedback. I think staff shares a lot of the concerns that were brought up this evening in terms of the draft regulations. And I think the direction that you're talking about is consistent with feedback that will be provided back to the consultant team. If I can just make sure that I'm understanding clearly the discussion at hand this evening by the Land Use Commission, your desire would be to have specific standards as it relates to planned developments, but with an understanding that those would not be super prescriptive. It would allow for flexibility and potentially even an option to opt out for certain constraints that might be specific to a site, with the understanding that that would come along with potentially some sort of fee in lieu of those requirements. In addition to that, I think what you're looking for is to ensure that we're continuing to pursue the climate action goals of the community, also looking at any landscaping to help support stormwater management and other types of activities on site. And that perhaps looking at an example similar to how Ann Arbor is regulating landscaping with a separate standalone guidelines that would not necessarily be integrated into the zoning ordinance. Is that a fair representation of the discussion this evening?
I think so, because I think one of the challenges that this presents is if we get really specific in landscaping, none of us up here are landscape architects. Or horticulturists, I don't think. I'll just double check before I make that statement. So I think for us to be asked to sit in and adjudicate issues around this is a little unfair to us. It's unfair to the homeowner who's presenting to us in certain cases, because we don't know all the implications of some of these things. The other thing that I would love to see, and it's kind of, I'm going off a little bit here off of what we're doing and everything. I mean, I would love to see the city recommit itself to taking care of its trees.
Yeah.
Because we have trees that come down due to damage, due to age, due to disease, whatever. And it's very difficult sometimes to replace those trees. We used to have a program, and I've been told it doesn't exist anymore. I don't know, where homeowners could help contribute to parkway trees in front of their buildings. Again, this is not for us. I'm just making this comment out there since City Council will be listening to this at some point. That's something I would love to see the city do. I mean, if we're going to commit to to our green spaces, the city has to commit and can't put it all on the residents themselves.
That's great feedback and could be integrated potentially as an action to address some of the policy statements that are listed.
So let me say something else. I'm not against having requirements for PDs and projects like that, but we have to be very careful of being too prescriptive. Chicago, I'm old enough to remember that Chicago's zoning code had for PDs, they had all these options that you could do and then get extra FAR for them, and they were like plazas and setbacks and arcades and things like that. They're very, very specific. It didn't work, and they gradually got rid of all that. So you can't design a project before it's designed. You can't do that, and so that didn't work for them. It's not going to work for us if we become too prescriptive.
There's some feedback. I really like the notes in here about screening, vegetative screening around dumpsters and trash and other kinds of like electrical
conditioning condensers.
Yeah, thank you. Those kinds of units. Great idea. I like to see that stay. There was question in here about whether or not these requirements should apply to residential as well as 4 or plus unit residential and bigger. I think it absolutely needs to address residential. If the goal is to increase our biodiversity and ecological value of our space, then the residential part of Evanston is way bigger than all the non-residential areas. So, but to not address it somehow would be missing a huge opportunity. Another point is that I think there's a lot of language in here that's very ambiguous about what the landscaping actually is. And we've touched on this a little bit, and I hear the calls about not wanting to become too prescriptive. However, the value of native plants is very large. I believe strongly in that. And if the language isn't specific enough, and when people do add landscaping, if there's putting in like non-native species like boxwoods or something, you're completely missing the point of trying to enhance biodiversity. So when you plant a non-native plant in an area, it's providing almost zero ecological value, to the surrounding area. So we do have very active, like Natural Habitat Evanston organizations here that would be well qualified to provide a list or a whole or samples of lists that could define native species relative to Chicago, sun, shade, partial shade, all that could be used as a guideline.
Are you saying it should be prescriptive or voluntary?
Well, that's a big question. I'm not sure which parts I'm saying.
Because
I'm saying
I think
the native plant parts is actually extremely important. And if you don't have a little bit more prescription on that, you're completely missing the point of these.
I have lots of boxwoods on my property.
If you love your boxwoods, love your boxwoods.
I love them. They look very nice. Other people have boxwoods too. The neighbors next door just planted a whole bunch of boxwoods. I just think it's wrong to tell a private property owner what to plant on their property.
I think some of it is encouragement of things.
Yeah. No, I mean, but there's zero enforcement in here, for the private property owner to do what they want with their property. We're talking about construction or active activity. So if a developer is building a row of townhomes, they put in.
But without having a definition as to what triggers that, which we don't have.
Right.
I mean, I have 1,000 square foot condo. Would me gut rehabbing my unit trigger landscaping of the whole building, or if 2 or 3 of us did? I mean, so
I'm not commenting on that. I'm not commenting on what the prescriptive parts are to be the trigger for these. What I am saying is that when things are triggered at the appropriate prescription level, however that's determined, you do have to make a differentiation between what native plants are and what native plants are not. Because if you don't, you completely miss the whole point and intent of these regulations.
And Ann Arbor has all of those lists in their ordinance. You click on trees, shrubs, grasses. I don't remember. There were like 5 categories, and I'm blanking them now. But they're things that I could, if I wanted to, plant these things. I could go and research and plant these things. Unfortunately, you have to have the right conditions in which to plant native plants too. And it's not uniform across the city. We have very sandy soil. There are other places, because we're on the eastern part of the city. If you go up into the western part of the city, you have a different soil type. So I think I would much rather see us be encouraging, helping people, educating people to understand this, as opposed to being very prescriptive about it. Because sometimes, the other problem with native plants is you have to know how to take care of them, just like anything else.
But they have a higher likelihood of actually surviving in the habitat that
they do,
where
but
they
you also have to understand what you're planting and what it's going to do, et cetera, like you do with every plant.
Right.
I think, do you have direction from us enough, or should I talk longer?
I think we have direction for now, and I would offer that, the draft that's presented when it's released is going to go through an evolution as it goes through the legislative process. And so, I appreciate the direction, and I think we can try to encapsulate it as best as possible in what is presented. And again, appreciate the commission's thoughts, and want to also validate some of the concerns because, as I said, staff shares them.
As long as we're talking about this, I'm going to go somewhere where this is not addressed in here, but it's something that's related to the subject, and that's this idea of private owners being in control over the trees on their property, not only planting them, but taking them down. And I know there's a police out there that go to your house and they look at the tree and they say, no, can't cut that down. Even though in the one case that's been in the press, it was leaning. I had a situation. I have large trees on my property. I have them checked periodically. This tree was checked. And guess what? It was a huge oak tree. It fell. It wasn't in a storm. It was a sunny day, but it wasn't checked properly. I don't know what happened, or maybe in the interval between. So if the city is going to continue doing this, I think that we should have a huge liability war chest that takes care of the lawsuits that are going to happen when people say, I need to cut that tree down, and the city says no, and it falls, and there's a huge amount of damage. Just saying. I have examples, so.
I agree. That's all I'm going to say. It's getting late, but I agree with you.
All right.
Say nothing.
You're all good?
Somebody raising hand.
Yep, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. I'm getting there. You're one step ahead of me. I just have to scroll back to my agenda to make sure I'm in the right section here. So staff didn't have a communication thing in here. I'm guessing that you don't have any communication for us, and that's why it was not included.
Not tonight. Thank you.
All right.
Can I ask about that?
Yeah.
Is there any update on the schedule for the rest of our meetings?
So the schedule moving forward, we have a referral discussion on the 23rd of October.
Sorry, what I meant was a couple meetings ago we talked about the concept of changing the schedule for this fall and winter in order to accommodate everything. Has anything happened with that?
So we've adopted one.
Yeah, and I can go through it if you'd like.
Which I
longer schedule.
It was the longer.
It's the longer one?
Yeah, with if you're referring to Envision Evanston 2045, the hearings will begin on November 20th and go until January 15th. We're happy to follow up with the commission to provide the exact dates. I think also based on the commission's availability, those hearings would begin at 6 p.m. Instead of 7 p.m. And yeah, we're happy to follow up with you all with the specific dates.
If you could just send out the specific schedule, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
All right. With that, we move on to public comment. I know I have at least one public comment in the room. If you'd like to come up and give us your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name's Mary Rosinski. I live at 1729 Chancellor here in Evanston, and I appreciate that you all seem to have read. This commission always reads with their data and stuff. I always feel like you're really well informed. I am a realtor, but I'm also on the Parks and Rec board. So Parks and Rec affect me in two ways. One, emotionally with my family. It is just, that's where we get our relaxation, and that's where most people do. And when people come to a city, they usually are coming for three reasons. One is because they have good schools. Two is because it's beautiful and they have a good Parks and Rec department. And three, they consider our government services being delivered properly. So when there is a study that's been commissioned by the state, by our city back 2 years ago, which was the Strategic Parks and Rec and Green Space. We don't have this final draft yet, and Parks and Rec hasn't even had time to talk with the consultants since the draft was released. And we, just so you know, one of the surveys shows that Evanston has about half the amount of parks per 1,000 residents than the median. That would be like for every 1,000 residents, we have 5 acres of park. The median is 9 acres of park. And if you look around our surrounding communities, we are at the low level. So anything we can do with building when we're doing our commercial and the multi-units and the big PUDs to create more of a sense of open space, green space, whatever that be, would help the overall environment and the healthy green effects that green space has on your population, which give them a sense of well-being. So I really want, and so I'm going to ask that you kind of continue this conversation until you have all the reports in front of you, because there's the survey reports, there's a 283-page draft strategic green space report that is really fundamental to this. And I do agree with everything you said about the fact that the coming down hard on residents to create the green space. And there, we have different areas of our city that don't have much of a tree canopy because their history is that they were industrial. And we should focus and point that out, that these places need more tree canopy, and how are we going to help them? And can we create more parks? Yes, we can. And, you know, spaces become available, they became vacated. We can do that as a community, and I'd love to see a plan for that. I do have a couple
Mary,
more comments.
excuse me.
Am I done?
In terms of this report, does it address, I brought up this before, where taking a plan of Evanston and saying where parks are needed or where they could possibly be located?
It doesn't get that specific, but as I say, we've seen the draft, and some of us have a lot of questions on the draft, and we were told we could email the consultants. But I personally think that something as important as that deserves the Parks and Rec Board to discuss and brainstorm with it, because just like you guys help each other kind of build ideas and scaffold it, that happens in our department too. And so it specifies some areas that needs it, and it talks about the maintenance, but does it get that detailed? No, and maybe it should. And maybe that report should include more of that. And so I think there's a lot of questions to be had there. The other thing, so I talked about the canopy. with the PUDs. I was just showing properties in the Gold Coast, and you're down in downtown Chicago and you're showing these buildings that are on the 12th, 13th, 14th floor. And I was struck by how beautiful it was looking out the windows of not the lake so much. Well, that's gorgeous, but looking at at the tops of these buildings around us. These people have amazing views with green roofs all over the place down there. And if we're going to really address our CARB issues, we need to focus on that. And we need these new buildings to do it. We need to give them incentives without having to go so high that it's crazy. But like 640 Maple, that's got one of the nicest green roofs I've seen. I think it is the nicest green roof I've ever seen in Evanston. And that sort of greenery and enjoyment for the public, not the public, but the residents, may take away from the green space they don't have on the first floor. And then they're happier and everyone's happier and our property values are better and our tax base is better. So everything that we do with Parks, Rec, green space is integrated. So I just really want to say, please consider having another conversation on this. Do not rush this. Most cities take anywhere from 2 to 4 years to come up with a zone, a comprehensive plan and zoning. They talk with their residents, and you don't rush it on some arbitrary date that somebody has picked out in their mind that they want it by March. I mean, we're too important of a city. We've got 78,000 people who deserve to be more aware of what's going on and have their input taken. And I don't think sticky notes and stuff like that does Evanston residents a service. It gives us an idea to start with, but it's the end product that we need to have a great city. So thank you for your time, and please, I will follow future discussions.
Thank you, Ms. Rosinski. Also, I'll just say that the conversation that we've had is just the beginning of the conversation on green space. This is not by any means the end of the conversation. So thank you, though, for coming and speaking. Any other public comment? I don't see anyone in the room raising their hand. So at this point, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Patel, a second. Seconded by Johnson. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We do stand adjourned until our next meeting on Wednesday, October 23rd at 7 p.m. in City Council chambers. Thank you.